Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We're kind of a small group, but there may be more joining us. And today's webinar will be archived, so if you want to share it with colleagues later, you can certainly do that. I'm going to go ahead and close our poll now. It looks like we're a pretty evenly divided group when it comes to thinking about the 4 C's and what's hard. So let's close that and come back to those topics in a little bit. Okay, so this is our last webinar Wednesday of 2012 from the Buck Institute for Education. So let's make the most of it today. Our topic is PBL and 21st century learning. I hope that you'll all have opportunities to be active participants today, as much as you can be in this format. So there are a few different ways you can take part. Most of you have already found and made use of the chat window, which is great. That'll be open throughout our next 45 minutes, and feel free to use that to continue the dialogue with your colleagues or share resources that you'd like to share. You'll also see a Q&A box at the bottom right corner of your screen. Let's use that to post questions that you'd like to discuss in the last 10 minutes or so of our time together. I want to leave time open for some Q&A, and we'll respond to your questions then. If some of you are using Twitter and like back channeling, let's use the PBL chat hashtag for today. And if you have questions after the webinar, you're thinking about these 4 C's and 21st century learning later, perhaps you'll have some resources to share that come to mind. You can connect with colleagues on the Edmodo site. I've got the link here. It's a very active community now of several thousand educators who are doing project-based learning and eager to learn together and collaborate and all those good things. So let's dig into our topic. So as you know, good questions are right at the heart of project-based learning. So I was thinking about a question that we might consider today as kind of our driving question for this webinar, and here it is. How can we use PBL to help students develop the competencies they will need for 21st century success? It's a question we often hear from teachers when they design and implement projects. I think most of you know, if you're doing projects yourself, the motivation to teach in this way often starts with a desire to get students ready for what's ahead of them, you know, the world beyond school, whether it's going to be college or careers or just good citizenship. So, you know, at this point we're about a dozen years into the 21st century, and we're still talking about preparing students with 21st century skills. We've been hearing about the importance of 21st century learning from all sorts of directions. There have been countless white papers and commissions. The National Research Council has weighed in. There's the Partnership for 21st Century Skills. ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education, talks about 21st century learning in its National Educational Technology Standards, the ISTE NETs. Government leaders, our president, everyone talks about, you know, what we need to do to get students ready for the future. And they've made the case consistently that students need to develop not just content understanding, but a certain portfolio of soft skills that go along with the academic content. There are certain ways of thinking, working together, thinking and doing that they're going to need if they're really going to be ready for the challenges ahead. But it turns out that developing these soft skills can be kind of hard. Getting really good at creative problem solving or critical thinking, collaboration, it just doesn't happen automatically. So there's an important role that PBL teachers can play, particularly in scaffolding these competencies and helping students develop. So to kind of help answer our driving question today, there are going to be some things we need to think about, some need-to-knows as we talk about in project-based learning. So here are the ones that came to mind for me as I was thinking about this kind of big and interesting question. You know, what do we really mean by 21st century competencies? Which one should we be focusing on in projects? What's the best fit for PBL in 21st century learning? How can we teach and assess these 21st century competencies? And where can we learn more? These are the need-to-knows that I have in mind, but I would love to hear your thoughts and questions. So feel free to use the chat, add to this need-to-know list, and let's be sure that we address your questions today as we're thinking about this. So let's start by considering just this central role that 21st century competencies play in project-based learning. Now, this graphic is going to be familiar to any of you who have participated in professional development from the Buck Institute for Education or have used BIE resources. You'll recognize these 8 essential elements, and we talk about them as essential elements because indeed they're all essential, they're all critical for project success. Now, it's not an accident that 21st century skills are right at the center of the diagram, along with significant content. In project-based learning, of course, students are mastering important content, and they're also developing ways of working and thinking that enable them to be successful. It's kind of a mashup, if you will, of content and competencies. And, you know, we want students to be able to go deeper with their learning in projects so that they're able to apply their knowledge to solve problems, tackle real problems, perhaps create something new. And as you think about this, the significant content, the academic content, will likely shift a bit from project to project, right? As you do projects in different subject areas or in interdisciplinary ways, you're going to focus on specific learning goals for your projects. But the 21st century competencies that students develop in PBL, those are pretty consistent across the disciplines, and they carry over from one project to the next. And the good news here is they get better with practice. So as students have more opportunities to put these competencies to use, and they get more support from you, their teachers and facilitators, they're going to get more proficient at these ways of doing projects. And it causes the whole project enterprise to kind of unfold more smoothly and allow students to kind of get to that deeper learning more quickly. But it takes some practice for students to get good at these skills, these competencies. We can't assume that they're going to arrive at school already knowing how to collaborate and think creatively if they haven't had opportunities to do that in a school context in the past. The good news is that these skills do get better in PBL because projects create opportunities for students to put these skills to use. So some recent research tells us that when teachers are implementing PBL, when teachers have had opportunities to really learn how to do this well, when they've had professional development and they're thoughtful about designing projects, then their students are spending more time applying 21st century skills. You can take a look at the website, bie.org/research, and learn a lot more. I would point you to the research study from West Virginia that shows some great results around 21st century learning. Just a little bit of context. But for today, let's take a look at 4 specific 21st century competencies that PBL helps to develop. Now, these are often called the 4 C's. That may be a familiar phrase to many of you. And specifically, the list includes collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking. Now, these aren't the only so-called soft skills that matter. You could make a strong case that global awareness, cultural competency, technology fluency, citizenship skills, these are also essential. These are things that students are going to be needing for the future. And indeed, many projects address these areas as well. But we're going to focus specifically on the 4 C's because these are the ones you're most likely to be addressing in projects most consistently. And helping students get good at these 4 C's are going to help them succeed in projects and we think in life as well. So let's dig in. So let's start with collaboration. Now, it's no accident that projects involve teamwork. in the world outside of school, very little gets accomplished without collaboration. You know, many tasks today in our complicated world are just too big and complex for any one person to tackle alone. There may be specialized skills or insights that are needed, in that people need to come together with their specialized ways of thinking and, you know, create something greater than any one of them could have accomplished alone. Bringing together team members who have different perspectives and expertise often yields better ideas. That's kind of an insight from the innovation research that's you know, over the last couple of decades. So we know that PBL creates a situation where students can put their teamwork to use in really authentic ways. But it only happens if you are, you know, being deliberate about why students are working together in a team and how you're going to support them being successful. So let's think about, you know, what this might look like. So here's an example of a project from Oklahoma. This is from Howe High School in Oklahoma, where students were very successful with a project called Project Lion Pride. Now, it was deliberately designed to help students get better at collaboration, because teachers recognized that this was a challenge, an area of challenge. They wanted students to be able to collaborate, and yet there wasn't a lot of shared experience, even at the high school level, in what good collaboration meant, what it looked like, how to make teams work smoothly and effectively. So they came together around a very relevant, engaging, driving question, which was, how can we make our school better? The project was authentic in that it led to a school-wide competition where teams made proposals for school improvements that were actually funded. So this was, you know, students were working on something real. It was going to happen. It was going to make their school better. And to succeed, they had to come together in their teams. Team members didn't necessarily know each other. They were cross grades, cross subject areas. They had to reach consensus around their ideas. They had to be accountable to each other. They had to present their work to judges as a cohesive team where everyone on the team, you know, kind of got behind that idea. They had to convey that excitement. And I'll tell you that the folks who designed this project designed it this way because these were new skills for most students. They needed some experience working in this way. It's gone on to be kind of an example, a model that other schools have emulated because it was so successful at helping students develop as collaborators and also improve their school culture. So how can you design projects that are really going to emphasize collaboration and get students to this kind of high level of team effort that we saw in Project Lion Pride? There are a few pointers we can share. One is, you know, really having a reason why students are working on teams. Sometimes students will ask, why can't I do this on my own? You know, why can't I work independently? There needs to be a reason why you're putting students into project teams in the first place. It may be that the work they're doing in this project mirrors work that happens outside of school. And in the world beyond school, projects like these require team efforts to happen. And so you want to give your students some kind of right-sized experience with those sorts of project efforts. It may be that there's a need to specialize. The project may be too complex or too big for any one person with any one kind of lens to be able to do effectively solo. It may be that time is compressed, and to get the project done within the constraints of time or budget, it's going to take a team effort to make it happen. So there could be lots of good reasons to do a project with a team, but you want to be clear about that as you're designing the project. So you're thinking about, why is this a suitable project for a team to tackle? And then as you form teams, you want to have a purpose behind that as well. You know, students will often say, you know, can't I just work with my friends, or we formed a team. We think we're going to be very effective. You know, this is really a key place for the teacher to have a strong leadership role in helping students think about what kind of team is going to be most effective. What Will there be frustrations that arise if you're working with, say, a boyfriend or a girlfriend? Are you going to be comfortable sharing your ideas in a team? Do you have different expertise that you can bring? What are your strengths? And is this team well balanced so that as a kind of cohesive unit, it's going to be able to tackle this project and really succeed? So again, having a plan and a purpose for your teams and then being able to communicate that to students is a really good strategy. You know, it should be easy for you to explain both to students and parents. Why are we doing this as a team, and why is this student working with these team members? That should be really clear to you. You should have a strategy for that. As students embark on team efforts, it's important to have a collaborative culture. Project Lion Pride did a lot of warm-ups before they got into kind of the most serious part of their project, because it was necessary for team members to get acquainted, first of all, to kind of trust each other, to develop some shared norms around, you know, how are we going to work together? How are we going to listen to each other's ideas? How are we going to come to consensus? Some teachers will foster this sort of culture by having students come up with team norms that they all agree to. Maybe they'll make some posters or reminders for the classroom setting that, again, are in student language, so that this kind of collaborative culture is their idea, not something that's being imposed on them. And they're really thinking hard about, how do we work well together as a team, and how do we support each other so that we're all successful? There are lots of resources teachers have developed to encourage team members to be accountable to each other. Things like developing team contracts or team agreements that students, you know, all sign on to, so that they're talking to one another and agreeing in advance, here's how we're going to work together. Here's our agreement in terms of meeting deadlines, sharing the responsibility. Here's kind of what happens if we let each other down. Here's how we're going to resolve that. If students are figuring out some of these issues themselves, it puts them in the role of problem solver rather than immediately turning to you as the teacher to intervene if team members are experiencing conflicts. You're going to be facilitating and helping them through the problem solving that may be necessary. But again, it's their ideas that you're working from, not something that you're imposing on them. And of course, technology tools can foster a lot of the collaboration and make it easier for students to collaborate from different places or at different times of day. You know, we find things like shared documents, Google Docs, or those sorts of resources are really helpful for you know, allowing students to work from anywhere, from any time, to give each other feedback, to create resources together. Wikis are another way for many students to collaborate on one site and have access to all those resources together. We're going to talk a little bit more about technology tools as we get going, but these are some of the ways that you can encourage collaboration. Now, communication, of course, is also one of the critical C's. And it's really hard to imagine a project that doesn't involve communication, right? I mean, how could you even begin to think about a project without communicating? But what does it mean for students to communicate effectively in the context of PBL? And how does PBL help foster that? Often we tend to focus communication on the presentation end of the project, where at a culminating event, students are kind of sharing what they've learned or demonstrating what they understand. But throughout the project, communication is really critical. There's a lot of overlap from one C to the next. If students are going to be collaborating well, they also need to be communicating well among their team members and with each other. And if they're going to be doing great research, they may need to be able to communicate with adults, you know, with content experts who are outside the school community. They may be needing to use the language of specific disciplines to communicate precisely what they're talking about. So lots of different ways that communication comes into play in a project. So again, let's think about what this might look like in practice. So here's an example from a middle school in the Bronx. In this example, students did a deep exploration of entrepreneurship. They developed their own business plans for companies or products that would fill a market gap in their neighborhood. So they had to do some research and thinking about that. And what you see here is the final project expo, where students are kind of doing a pitch, just as entrepreneurs do in the real world when they pitch their ideas to funders. Students are pitching to business experts who have come to the school to evaluate their ideas, give them some feedback. It's really important that these students be able to get across their ideas succinctly to communicate why their plan is a good plan and why it fits a community need. So throughout the project, a teacher named Nicole Lentino was very deliberate about teaching and scaffolding key communication skills. She helped students think about, how do you be an active listener? What does that mean? How do you interview an expert? How do you talk with your fellow team members? How do you communicate your ideas succinctly and persuasively? How can visual aids or kind of snappy slogans help make your ideas memorable? So all these things came to bear in this project. In the projects that you're designing, you might think about effective communication in a number of ways. Throughout the project, you're going to be a model yourself for effective communication. You're going to be modeling kind of active listening with your students, active speaking, the way that you share your ideas and get them across, perhaps with, again, visual aids or other things that make thinking more visible to students. You're also going to be thinking about, what are some low-risk opportunities for students to grow into these communication skills? For students who haven't had a lot of experience speaking before an audience or presenting in public, or students who may be English language learners and may be a little reluctant to kind of speak up in front of a crowd, you want to ease them into this. So you want to create low-risk opportunities where maybe they're just presenting, first of all, to a partner one-on-one. Then maybe they'll present to their whole team or to another team. Very friendly audience at first, right? So they're getting that kind of good feedback, but at the same time developing some confidence that, yep, I can do this. Helping students overcome the jitters that sometimes come with having to communicate orally, or all those sorts of ways we can ease them into this experience and let them build on their success. You're also going to be helping students think about, why is it we want to communicate beyond the classroom? How are we going to connect with experts, and how are we going to kind of get from them what we need to know? How are we going to ask questions in a way that's really precise and gets right at what we want to find out? As I said before, you want to build toward those public presentations, and you're going to do lots and lots of practice with students in all kinds of different ways. Maybe you're going to have them videotape each other and critique their presentations together, so they get great formative feedback that helps them build toward those final results that are going to be, we hope, spectacular. So let's think about critical thinking a little bit, right? And the next C on our list. This is not a new idea. We talk about it as a key 21st century skill, but way back in the days of Socrates, we were thinking about this kind of thinking. What does it mean to evaluate evidence, to look for bias or faulty logic? In other words, to think critically. So, what makes this a 21st century competency? I think we can look kind of in some broad strokes at what it means to be living in the information age, where we're just awash with more information that's ever been at our fingertips, at any time in history. We have this unprecedented access to information, but how do we know what is reliable? How are we going to evaluate that for credibility, for bias, all those sorts of things? I think also we can look at the complexity of problems facing the world today, whether it's in health, energy, economics, these sorts of grand challenges facing us. Solving these problems is going to demand thinkers who can evaluate potential solutions. If we're going to solve problems, we have to think about lots of possible ways to tackle them, and then figure out, where's kind of the wedge? Where should we put our resources? Where should we put our energy? And of course, for your students, you're going to be creating some right-sized challenges. They're not ready to tackle, global poverty at this age. Maybe some of them are. We've seen some amazing projects, but you're going to create some right-sized challenges for them that are going to require them to put their problem solving to work in the same way and evaluate which solution is really the one that I feel good about diving deeper into. Because on even a smaller scale, we're all going to need to be able to think critically to make informed decisions in the future, whether it's in our voting or taking out student loans, how we're going to contribute to society. All of these things are going to require critical thinking skills. So again, let's think about a project that deliberately emphasizes critical thinking. This one is the campaign ad project. It was developed by teachers in the Envision Schools network. And it's just a great example of a project that causes students to really think critically. In this case, students were challenged to evaluate the pros and cons of measures on the ballot right now, in this past election cycle. So they had to think about ballot measures, really read them carefully, analyze them, take a position on one of them, and then apply their understanding by developing their own political ads to influence specific voter audiences. So there was a real purpose to this. You can imagine for students who are approaching voting age, the relevance of a project like this. This is a way to get students thinking about their own role as citizens, their own future as voters, how they analyze ballot measures, and how they're influenced by political advertising. So all those things have to do with thinking critically. In the design of projects, you can encourage critical thinking in a number of ways. In the campaign project, take a listen to the driving question. The question was, what's the most effective persuasive technique used by media to tip voters' minds? Let me read that again. What's the most effective persuasive technique used by the media to tip voters' minds? So you'll notice that just in the phrasing of that, it's asking students to think critically. They're having to evaluate to find the most effective persuasive technique. You can really unpack that driving question and find a lot of kind of prompts that are going to lead students to be thinking critically en route to answering that driving question. So just in the way you phrase the driving question, you're going to set the stage for the kind of thinking that students are going to need to do in order to be successful. So if you're writing driving questions that ask students to think about what's most important, or what's the best method, or questions that call for that kind of evaluation, you're building critical thinking into your project. Throughout the project, you want to reinforce a range of thinking strategies. Don't assume that students will just have an automatic ability to tackle a big question and know just how to think about it. They need some strategies to tackle tough questions. So help them think about, is the goal here to compare and contrast? Or is it to look at cause and effect thinking maybe? Or are we looking for inferences or bias? And for each of those kinds of thinking strategies, there are specific activities you can do with students and tools you can introduce to them, graphic organizers, things like that, that help them get comfortable and well practiced at applying these strategies. So think about the thinking strategies that are going into the project. You're also going to be helping students be critical readers. In the course of projects, they're often going to have to tackle some challenging reading material. And they may need your help in kind of scaffolding that. So help them think through, how can I unpack this text and really get to understand what are the arguments in it? Are there arguments that the author left out, and why is that? Is there any evidence of bias? How can I tell? What inferences are here? So developing strategies that help students of all ages think critically, particularly about nonfiction, which again is something that we're all going to be seeing a lot more of a call for as we move toward the Common Core state standards. Nonfiction reading is big demand under the Common Core. So think about the strategies you're going to use to help students really read closely and think critically about complex text that may be essential to being successful with the project. Some of the ways that teachers help students tackle text, maybe things like Socratic seminars. Again, help prompt them, get them ready for this. They may never have engaged in a Socratic seminar before, or a really deep dive into talking about some complex text. So they may need some help from you in terms of sentence starters. How do I make an argument? How do I disagree with someone? So you may want to provide some sentence starters, make those public in your classroom. Again, these are going to be very helpful for students who are English language learners. And really for all students who are new to this sort of, careful analysis, argumentation, unpacking of what they're reading. And throughout this, you're going to be helping students develop their information literacy by assessing their sources for validity and bias. What can I trust? What's information that I can use as evidence and feel is going to be reliable. And finally, we're going to come to our fourth C for today. This is really one of my favorites, creativity and innovation. Projects often challenge students to put their creativity to work. And that's just a great thing because we know that creative thinkers are in high demand today. These are the people that we're going to count on in the future to come up with solutions to problems or products that delight us all and create new market opportunities and fuel our economy, or just make the world more interesting through the power of their ideas. So what is it that you're doing to help kind of develop the creativity and innovative thinking capacity of students who may just well turn out to be the next Steve Jobs or Martha Graham or Frank Lloyd Wright, or name your favorite creative thinker here. So once again, projects provide the opportunity for students to practice putting their creativity to work and to develop their confidence to think creatively. So here's an example of a project that emphasized creative problem solving in a math and science context. This was at Tech Valley High in Rensselaer, New York, and teacher Leah Penniman challenged her students to improve on the design of a solar oven. This wasn't theoretical. It was an oven design that was actually going to be used in rural Haiti so that people in kind of low resource areas would be able to heat water without having to use charcoal. So there would be environmental benefits here. But the design challenge meant students had to apply what they understood about algebra and material science. They had to think about cultural context to meet the needs of Haitian families. So they had to empathize with the users of their solution. And then they had to think creatively within constraints, just as engineers and other problem solvers do outside of school. In fact, Penniman consulted with some engineers when she was planning the project to make sure that she was really framing it in an authentic way. And then the same engineers provided critical feedback to help students improve their work during an iterative design process where they would try an idea at a very rough prototype stage, test it, get some feedback, see what worked, see what didn't. Lots of time to improve on their work through that kind of process. So as you're thinking about projects that seem to offer opportunities for students to think creatively, what can you do to really emphasize creative thinking and innovation? So of course, problem solving is a natural part of project-based learning, but to help students think about themselves as problem solvers, sometimes you have to encourage their confidence. Students who haven't had opportunities to try out wild ideas or think outside the box or all those ways we talk about problem solving, they may need some encouragement. Just offering up an idea that seems novel can seem risky if students are used to an answer, presenting an answer that's the correct answer. Here, there are going to be lots and lots of possible great solutions. And students need the confidence and encouragement from you to tap into that creativity and bring it to the fore in projects. So it helps to sometimes introduce them to some innovation strategies. You can't just assume that students are going to be able to sit together with their classmates and have a great brainstorming session. You may tell them, go work with your teams and brainstorm. Well, what does that mean exactly? How do you go about that? You may want to spend some time with students brainstorming as a whole group and trying out some strategies to help extract their great ideas so that they can build up a big idea bank to work with throughout the project. There may be quieter voices in the room that you don't hear from so much in kind of rowdy brainstorming sessions. So maybe you'll try brain writing, where you have students kind of share on paper or on sticky notes some of their ideas, or perhaps on an online site like Wallwisher, so that you get all those ideas kind of percolating up and you make sure all voices are heard from. Then you have lots of ideas to work with as students kind of move into the testing and iterating process of taking potential ideas and figuring out which ones they want to work with. So in any project that's going to involve creativity, students need to be comfortable taking risks. They need to be open to hearing others' ideas and being kind of non-judgmental. This requires a certain environment in your classroom, a context that's comfortable for all those things to happen. So again, some culture building may be necessary. And for a lot of students, a key piece here is reframing failure as part of the creative process. We're so used to failure being just kind of the worst thing that can happen to you as a student. We need to create some opportunities for students to see that failure is a step on the way to success. So they need to hear lots and lots of examples of great ideas that develop through a series of failures overcome. The literature is full of these. I've written extensively about these as well, but help students see that we learn from failure. We don't have overnight success in almost every field. Any great success, you can take a look at it, look for the story behind an invention or an idea or a work of art, and you can see that there was a lot of struggle leading up to it. So again, kind of creating a context where this is the way things happen in your classroom and where students are supporting each other in this process is how you're going to get there. There's a site I'll add later in the chat. It's called failfare.org, fail, F-A-I-R-E, and it gives you some great suggestions for how to learn from failure, how to actually celebrate failure as a step towards success. So how do you build a solid foundation for these 4 C's? What can you be doing at the design stage, implementation and assessment of projects, so that you're emphasizing 4 C's and developing students' capacities? These competencies don't just kind of appear full-blown. It's a very developmental process. So you want to be thinking about how do we get students to continue building their competencies in these areas. I think, as you're planning projects, of course, this is the project planning guide that you'll find on the BIE site. You'll notice that 21st century skills are called out here on the plan, but be thinking about which ones do you really want to emphasize in a project. So what are the right, what's the right fit for a particular project? You don't want to overwhelm students by emphasizing everything under the sun. Instead, you want to be kind of selective and think about, is this a project that really is an opportunity to build collaboration skills? Or is this one that is so well suited to critical thinking or problem solving? And then kind of be selective as you're designing the project. And when you choose which of these skills to deliberately teach and assess, that's going to inform the rest of your project planning. I mentioned earlier that the Common Core and the 4 C's really go together naturally. And I think that the key point here is that the 4 C's are not extra work. They're not something that's going to be layered onto what you're already doing. They're really integrated into great projects. Critical thinking, creative problem solving, these are called for almost word by word, word by word in the Common Core when you see things like, an expectation that students are going to be making arguments supported by evidence. That's critical thinking in a nutshell, right? Or doing statistical analysis or creating models as part of problem solving. There's a really natural fit here between the Common Core and the 4 C's. So don't think of the 4 C's as something extra, but just think of them as something essential to projects. And I think that's going to help with your own thinking about how to incorporate these. As we've been talking about, there's some scaffolding required. Students don't come by these skills, these competencies automatically. And this is where your role is really critical in helping students understanding kind of where they are, and then how to take them where you hope that they'll go with their competencies as 21st century thinkers. So again, back to our project plan. As you're in the design stage of a project, you want to be thinking about, which elements here are going to help with the 21st century skill that I really want to emphasize in this project. I'm going to tell you in a moment about a resource we have coming out soon from VIE that digs much deeper into kind of what are the hard and soft scaffolds that help you as you're, helping students deepen their abilities as 21st century thinkers and doers. But at the project planning stages, be thinking about how can I ensure that I know how students are progressing with their collaboration skills, if that's what's important, or their critical thinking. How can I check in on their understanding and then take these skills to the next level? So simple things like, having some management tools like something that tracks, team contributions to a project, for example. If you think of this as a collaboration assessment, formative assessment for collaboration, in a quick way, it helps you think about, okay, are they living up to their promises that they've made each other as a team? Are they sharing their responsibility equally? And if not, perhaps this is a time to have a conversation or get them to do some reflection about collaboration. Whatever the particular competency may be that you're emphasizing, be sure you're including ways to check in and then take them to the next step. Time management, of course, is one aspect of projects, but when you check on those products at the formative stages, you're going to be checking not just for the academic mastery, but also, what does this reflect about kind of where they are as, whether it's critical thinkers or creative problem solvers, whatever it is you're trying to emphasize, be thinking about that at your formative check-ins as well, not just the academic content. And of course, your project calendar is a way for you to remind yourself of all the different kind of formative tools that you're going to incorporate in the project to be checking on their development of 21st century skills. I've included this link because lots of downloadables you'll find here will help you with formative assessment of projects. And, I just kind of wanted to give a shout out to all of the technology tools, the Web 2.0 tools that are going to support students in their development of 21st century skills. There are more than we can dig into today. That may be a topic for another day. But I would encourage you to think about how can you incorporate ones very selectively that help you accomplish the 21st century thinking that you're trying to encourage. So if it's critical thinking about a text, are you using something like Digo to help students annotate a difficult text and, add some kind of digital sticky notes that help them communicate their thinking about what they're reading? Are you using Skype to help connect them with experts when it's time to, communicate with someone outside the school? All those sorts of things, collaborative documents. I'm sure in the chat you could share a few of your favorites. And in your own professional work, are you kind of walking the talk when it comes to collaboration and critical thinking? these are just a few suggestions of ways that in your peer-to-peer work with your colleagues, you can role model being a 21st century thinker and doer yourself. So we could spend a little more time talking about assessment, but I think what I'd like to do is, get into some of your questions. We're coming, near the end of our 45 minutes together, and I would like to take a quick look at questions that have come up so far. And if you have more questions that you'd like to talk about in our last few minutes together, go ahead and add those in the Q&A section or in the chat, either one, but probably Q&A is going to be the easiest way to find them. Pardon me just a minute here while I pull up some questions. So a question from Eric. Too often great projects are undercut by poor or mediocre presentation skills. The how to present part of materials. Presentation is that kind of the end result of students having developed great communication skills, right? So throughout the project, if they're going to be presenting their work publicly at the end, you want to get them ready for that. So your project plan should include lots of time for students to develop and practice the communication skills that they need to get to a successful presentation at the end. So Eric, I agree that you don't want to have a great project end with a whimper because students haven't had time to think about how am I going to communicate the great work that I've done in this project. You want the presentation to be just as terrific as whatever it is that they've created or developed. So I agree with you there. Spend plenty of time on getting ready for presentation. Another question here about the NETS competencies with P21 4Cs. I think there's a lot of, if I'm understanding your question correctly, Rick, a lot of different standards are calling for 21st century skills. The ISTE NETs have their way of talking about these skills. P21 has kind of its language. And, I think we can look for, and I would suggest the Common Core offers, yet another, big document for us to think about in terms of standards that we want to help students reach. But I think you can find consistency across all of these documents if you really think about what's essential in terms of preparing students, for the world ahead of them. I think starting with the 4 Cs is a good starting place. And I think you would find these in each of the documents that you've referenced. And then, of course, from there, what else is important? What else is essential? Technology, for technology's sake, is probably not where you want to go, but technology to support collaboration or technology to support, creative work is going to enhance what students are doing and what they're accomplishing. And I think those were the key questions. Just taking a quick look here at the chat to see if there are others. What I'd like to suggest, I'm going to zip through a little bit here toward the end because we're running just a little over time. A couple things I wanted to let you know will be available. This presentation will be archived and available on the BIE site right after we finish today. And these resources, of course, are available on the BIE site. And I wanted to let you know that many of the examples that I talked about today are going to be included in a book that's coming soon from BIE. I'm just working on final revisions, going through an iterative process, as we always recommend with great projects, right? So it's going to be taking a much deeper look at PBL and the 4 Cs. So lots of practical, classroom-driven advice from the field, as well as some tools and resources that are really going to help you think about designing, managing, and assessing projects to take the 4 C's, as deeply as you can go with students. So that's going to be coming out early in 2013. So keep an eye out for that on the BIE site. And finally, it's always good to reflect after anything PBL related. So if you're going to be thinking about a particular 21st century competency that you really want to help students develop, I've created a wall wisher site here. If you want to weigh in and add a reflection, I'll leave this up just for a minute so you can get the site. And I'd love to see your thoughts later. And I'm going to share one more resource for you. I see a question in the chat from Rick about using this presentation. Yes, it's going to be archived and it's freely available for you to use in professional development with your teachers. Feel free to share it in whatever context makes the most sense for you. And I hope it's useful. And we would always welcome more questions or feedback from you and your colleagues. And I'm going to share a couple places where you might go to continue our conversation. So if you have follow-up questions today, we went kind of quickly through the wild world of the 4 C's in PBL. Feel free to join this Edmodo site. Thousands of PBL teachers are already members here. You can post questions or follow-up from today. Maybe there are resources you'd like to share. And if you have specific questions, I'll be checking the conversations there, and we'll certainly follow up and answer any additional questions that you have. So I think that brings us to the end today. Feel free to connect with me directly if there are resources or suggestions I can share with you, or give me a shout out on Twitter if there's anything that I can help you with. Thanks so much for those of you who attended today, and I will leave the chat open for a little bit in case you have any follow-up comments. But thanks for your time and thanks for your interest. And good luck with your PBL journeys.